We'll just get started in a few minutes. We have about 6 people. So that for those that have just logged on, I'm just trying to put you into the panelist section, just so that we can have more of a conversation rather than you being stuck on the webinar side. So if you see a panel that pops up that says accept promotion to panelists, you can accept that, or if you'd rather stay in the webinar part, that's fine. Okay, I think in the interest of time, we'll get started. I won't be able to permit anybody else because I have to run the presentation. I can't see the Zoom. But after the presentation and I stop sharing my screen, then I'll be able to do that and we can have more of a conversation. So can everyone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yep.
Yes. Are you going to introduce yourself?
Yes, I am. So my name's Dana Peak, and I'm the principal planner and historic preservation officer for the city. We're here to talk about the San Jose Eichler neighborhood objective design standards. We have one member in the audience, Ben from PAC SJ, and yourself. Let me just sort of give you an outline. This meeting is really to give you the opportunity to provide feedback. It's hard with community meetings to know what everyone's background is on having read the documents. So I'm going to give just sort of a brief overview of it, and the remainder will just be for you to provide any feedback you want to provide. I've promoted you all to panelists, at least the people that I've seen so far. So if you have any questions, please feel free to speak up. This is not a formal meeting. It was meant to be more in person and a conversation. So those on, feel free to just stop me if you have a question. So I'm just going to do a little bit on project background and then generally what objective design standards are. Just a general overview on the different sections of the document, and then we'll have time for your community and just what the next steps are. So again, my name's Dana Peak. I'm the city's historic preservation officer. I'm not sure whether most of you are from the Fairglen Additions neighborhood. If you are, you'll already be familiar with the background. Hi. Are you here for the Eichler? Perfect. We're just starting the meeting. Everybody else is online, so. So as you know, not this project, but in general, these concepts were initiated in 2016 when a group of Fair Glen Addition residents formed the Fair Glen Additions Preservation Committee to try to get the neighborhood listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So in 2018, that's when Sally prepared the National Register Multiple Properties documentation for the housing tracts of Joseph Eichler in San Jose, California, 52 to 93. That was a wonderful nomination because it provides all the documentation to allow other Eichler neighborhoods in San Jose to also list their neighborhoods on the National Register by providing the so that was such a great document to have and such a gift to the rest of the. So in 2019, the Fair Glen Additions neighborhood was listed on the National Register. And following that, the idea was developed to draft some design guidelines for how to maintain, repair, and modify Eichler houses, and then how to treat new construction in the district so that the distinctive characteristics of the neighborhood. That group used the design guidelines for Eichler houses from the city of Orange, Palo Alto, and Sunnyvale as references. So that was provided to the city and a real interest from the Preservation Committee to get the guidelines published and adopted by the City Council. So in 2024, the city hired Page and Trimble to review that draft design guidelines that was prepared by the Preservation Committee and convert them into objective design standards, and also to convert them to more Eichler citywide guidelines rather than specific to the Fair Glen Addition.
Excuse me, Dana.
Yes.
Is there something you can do to improve the quality of your audio? It cuts out now and then, and I miss a word here and there. It hasn't been a problem yet, but I think when you get into the more substantive part of your presentation, there might be issues with understanding what you're saying.
Okay. Does this help?
Don't know yet because you haven't said more than a couple words.
Okay. Well, just keep let me know. There's not much I can do because I'm in a room that is coordinated by the AV department. So
Okay.
there's not a lot I can do about that, but I will try to speak directly into the microphone for you.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was a wireless issue or I'm not a tech person, but
Sure. I always find when we're in the Historic Landmarks Commission meeting that if people don't speak directly into the microphone, you can't hear it on Zoom. So I will do my best. So again, the objective of hiring Page and Trimble was to turn the design guidelines into design standards that were objective, and to also make them applicable to the other 5 Eichler neighborhoods in San Jose should those neighborhoods be designated. So the draft Eichler neighborhood objective design standards are now out for review. And just take a moment to talk about objective design standards. These really came into play when a lot of the new housing laws that the state was implementing came into fruition. It's intended to make design requirements easier to interpret and more predictable for everyone involved in a project. They're really primarily by law required for new housing development projects, not necessarily for existing, but there will be instances where new construction, could potentially occur in the neighborhood. And so we can only apply objective design standards. So it will be necessary for those types of projects as well. So if we don't have any objective design standards, we don't have very much control over the look of things in our community. So that's the reason to ensure that projects continue to fit in with the city's vision that it has for the community. So objective design, so what's the difference between guidelines and standards? So guidelines, there is discretion that's applied or leeway in interpretation. And standards are more measurable and verifiable. And they use language like shall or must. So there's an example on the slide where it says a design guideline might be provide articulation to reduce the apparent mass and scale of the building and to be sensitive to the neighborhood. So you can see that that provides a little bit of interpretation about how different people might, define mass and scale and what would be sensitive. So an objective design standard would be at intervals of at least 100 feet of building length, there shall be a plane break along the facade composed of an offset of at least 5 feet in depth by 25 feet in length. The offset shall extend from grade to the highest story. So the drawback about design standards, as you know, I'm sure as you provide comments later on in the meeting, is that we have to sort of anticipate what that design standard is going to look like when it's applied. So because there's no leeway there and you have to follow it, it's going to be what it's going to be. So you have to be careful about, the kinds of things that we're saying must and shall. So this is just an outline of the document. It's divided into 9 chapters. Chapter 1 is basically, the document is to provide design requirements. And again, it's the shall and the must, which are the standards. There's also sections in the document that's voluntary guidelines, guidance, which would be the guidelines. And these are specific to Eichler houses. And it's for property owners and design professionals and city staff when you're planning and reviewing projects for exterior modifications or new constructions to homes in Eichler neighborhoods. The guidelines only apply when homeowners propose a project requiring a planning permit. And they only apply to properties listed in the San Jose Historic Resources Inventory. So right now, that's just the Fair Glen additions. It only applies to exterior changes, and it doesn't cover changes to the interior. And the guidelines would be applied as part of the single-family house process, which is our process for changes to properties that are listed in the inventory, houses mainly. They supplement the Your Old House guidelines, which are pictured on the right. The Your Old House guidelines, if anybody has used them or is familiar with them, they're primarily for the styles that are covered in them are mainly pre-World War II houses. So you have a lot of revival styles, Victorian styles, bungalows, which are very, very different from Eichler houses, which are post-World War II and very modern. So the idea is to provide a new set of guidelines that would supplement these that are particular to the design, character, and features of Eichler houses. As I said before, there's 5 neighborhoods that are Eichlers in Eichler neighborhoods in San Jose. only one is designated, and that's the Fairglen Additions. But if a neighborhood came forth and they wanted to designate their neighborhood in the future, then these guidelines would apply if they were designated and listed on the historic resources inventory. I'm sorry? Yes, yes. The guidelines, the standards are based on the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. And their associated guidelines for preserving, rehabilitating, and restoring and constructing historic buildings. And these are all concepts about maintaining, repairing, and replacing historic materials, and also designing new additions and making alterations to historic buildings. They're written in a way that provide general design and technical recommendations. And the design standards for the Eichler project are written to be consistent with these standards and guidelines. Chapter 2 talks about guiding principles and key concepts. So when we apply standards and guidelines, we look at the specific houses. When the National Register nomination was done, properties were looked at individually, and they were determined whether they contributed or didn't contribute to the character of the neighborhood. So the chapter talks about how each of those contributing or non-contributing properties would be treated. The public realm versus the private realm. So there's guidelines about the public realm in terms of the street and the setting. It talks about what the primary and secondary features of character are for Eichler homes, and also provides definitions. So in order to determine what would be compatible with the character of an Eichler house, we have to look at what the character defining features are. So there's a couple of illustrations in the document that talk about what the primary original features were, and it points them out in a diagram, and then what the secondary features are. And those are the features that we're going to want to maintain in order to preserve the character. The third chapter goes through the history and characteristics of the neighborhood. There's interesting information on the Eichler neighborhoods that came from the National Register nomination, and the various features, general characteristics and features that make them significant. Chapter 4 is really kind of the meat of it. These are the standards for projects, and the chapter is divided into different sections. One talks about roofs, the other about exterior cladding and what's appropriate for changes to that, how to treat carports, garages and exterior doors, windows, mechanical, and security. So one example that's in the guidelines just talks about exterior cladding materials and what's important. And again, these are written as shalls and musts, and then it gives examples as to what we're looking for and what to avoid. Chapter 5 talks about standards for additions and accessory structures. The examples that are provided give sort of a visual example of compatible additions and some second story additions that should be avoided. Chapter 6 talks about setting and landscape. As I said, it goes over things that are character defining for the front yards, the walkways, driveways, paved surfaces, fences, and exterior cladding. Again, examples about the driveway and walkways and what we're looking for and what should be avoided. And chapter 7 talks about how to treat non-contributing buildings. And it goes through the same format as chapter 4, which is it looks at the setting and the roof forms and the cladding materials and how to treat non-contributing buildings with additions. Chapter 8 is exclusively devoted to infill or new construction. So again, it just talks about height, massing, and some general examples. And chapter 9 deals with ADUs. So this is a guidelines chapter because we don't review single family house permits are not required for ADUs. So it gives some general guidelines and design advice for people, but they're not required. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for the moment. Let's see. So at this point, oh, I see Kathy, you have your hand up. Again, it's hard because most people are online. So I don't know what people's familiarity are with the guidelines. We're really here to take comments based on the text that's in the document. So I see a couple hands up, and we'll just get started. I think I'm going to start with people online first, if that's okay. And there's 9 attendees. I'm going to put you in the panelist section if I can. So that you'll be able to talk. And I'm sorry, I'm only one person trying to run this, so it's a little bit complicated with online and so those who are attendees that are not panelists yet, I'm promoting you to panelists, and you'll need to accept that. It's something will pop up on your screen. Those that are calling in, I'm not able to make you a panelist. You don't need to accept it if you don't want to, but if you do, please push accept panelist. Okay, there's quite a few people that aren't accepting, so I'm going to just go on to those that have their hands up. All right, let me just get a pen just a second. All right, Kathy, you can unmute yourself.
Okay. Originally, my hand was up just to call to your attention the fact that I wasn't able to hear you clearly, but I do have a few questions or comments as well. And I'm just wondering where to start. I guess a really simple one that occurs to me way back toward the end, where you're talking about landscaping in these standards. As I understand it, none of these rules would apply at all unless a permit was being sought. And that's not normally required for landscaping unless you're, moving a certain amount of dirt or putting in electricity or changing plumbing or, building a retaining wall or something. So I'm curious to know why there is a statement about what should be planted in the parkway, specifically low growing plantings up to 2 feet high, that type of thing.
Sure. I mean, you have a good point. We can only really review, what somebody's applying for a permit for. We do conformance review for building permits. So if something came through like a retaining wall, we would potentially look at that. But, you know, if you're planting your landscaping in front, you know, you're not going to be, that's not going to require a permit that can be reviewed by the city. So I'm just going to note that.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm wondering, I'm sure you want to make it as easy as possible for people to comply with these rules, whatever they are. And also at the same time, you want to make it as you want to encourage people to apply for permits when they're required. And you don't want to set anybody up for a situation where people say, well, gee, if I apply for a permit, are they going to make me, you know, are they going to have some comments about what's planted in my parkway on their way up to the front door to look at, you know, what I'm applying for a permit on? Or is the inspector, while he's here, going to, you know, be commenting on, gee, there's a little berm here in your landscaping, which could be part of a water garden, you know, for that matter these days.
Sure.
So, yeah, you know, that type of thing. So,
And just to clarify, normally what we do is when the city receives a draft document, we will make comments on it and it will go back to the consultant and then it will go out to the public. That was the case for this project because we didn't have the funds to do that. So what you're seeing right now is the draft that I'm seeing for the first time. So there haven't been any city comments made on it yet. And that's why I'm saying, you know, that's a good point, because these are all things that we would be saying too. They are outlined as objective design standards. So I think that's something to, you know, point out and discuss with them. Maybe some are standards and some are guidelines.
okay. I noticed a couple of typographical errors that seem to affect the meaning. There are some others that don't really, I'm sure anybody would catch as they were reading through, but I wanted to make sure that I was reading them correctly. And I'll have to dig through my notes and I'll put my hand back up in a minute.
Sure.
Maybe go on to others and I'll find the pages where those occurred that I wanted to ask about.
Also, these are going to be open for review through November 8th. So if you would like to make notes and email them to me at the end, I'll provide information about where comments and how comments can be made. This is a kind of, and that's probably more nitty gritty, you know, into the weeds, what you're talking about. We do want to get in the weeds to talk about, you know, what do we think about second story additions in terms of shall and must and these types of concepts. But if there's typographical errors or word choice errors or something, that might be good to email.
Okay.
Okay, Daniel?
Thank you. First, I want to say I think the document is generally excellent, and thank you to everybody who put work in. I know Sally started it. I live in Fairhaven, and so we're not historically certified yet, but we're considering doing it. And I have a couple of technical points on the document, and you started it, second story. Our community of Eichlers feels very strongly that second story should not be allowed. And so I'm in both for houses and for ADUs. So that would be section 5.1.2 and section 9.1.6. So I'd like to maybe hear from you, Dana, or the architects as to why you left it in. What's your reasoning for allowing second stories in neighborhoods that never had any?
Sure. I think the reason really was flexibility. You know, properties are very, very expensive in the Silicon Valley. Families' needs have changed and are growing. So the idea was to allow people the opportunity to expand their homes in a way that, you know, it might be sensitive. But again, you know, this is something to discuss, and this is where it gets difficult about the, you know, the shalls and the mays. But it is something that we will need to make a decision on. So
yeah, I would like to speak for Fairhaven because we have actually codified in our updated CCRs that second stories are not allowed. That we would recommend to not allow it in the objective design standard. And I am on the Fairhaven Architectural Review Committee because we do have our own process in our bylaws and CCNRs. So that would kind of be our input on that topic. I understand the flexibility, but you can build out the back side of the house as a way to grow the square footage.
Sure. Yep.
Then the next point, I have two more points. One in the document. On fences in front yards, section 6.3.1. The objective standard allows fences in front yards to box in the front yard. And that is very much not an Eichler kind of landscape kind of thing. And so I'm wondering again, my question, what was the reason, for doing that?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were going to go on.
No.
Yeah. So basically the direction that we gave to the consultant was to provide some flexibility. So that's what they've done. And then the
Mhm.
idea was we would give them feedback, is this too far?
Mhm.
But, again, given the fact that this is an objective standard, we're trying to provide some flexibility. So I understand what you're saying.
Mhm.
And it's just something I think, we'll have to talk about with the consultant and also see what they think.
Right.
They are qualified historic resources consultants. They have done other Eichler and guidelines, so they are very familiar with it. And it's really just how strict the community wants to be. And these right now only apply to one neighborhood. They could apply to your neighborhood, if you were to designate.
Yeah.
So it's hard because this is something that has to apply to the city of San Jose. And the city of San Jose can't enforce CCNRs. So we would just have to figure out maybe where the middle ground is.
Right. So I guess I would like to just be on record as recommending from not just myself, but on behalf of Fairhaven, that we would prefer the recommendations to be no second stories and no front yard fences. So that changes the three sections that I mentioned.
Okay.
And then I have one last thing, don't mean to take everybody's time. But as I mentioned, since Fairhaven has redone its CCNRs, and in its CCNRs, there are specifics on some of these points. What is the relationship and precedence between our CCRs and the objective design standard?
Well, like I said, the city cannot legally enforce CCNRs. So that would be, between you and
Right, but here's the dilemma that I think we face, because Fairhaven is in the process of pursuing historic preservation status. But if we did that, and now there's two documents in force, right? And we would need to know which one has precedence. Because if ours are stricter in some place, then could somebody say, well, I'm following the objective standard, and therefore I don't have to follow the CCNR, whereas the CCNR, since it's bound to the title, the actual binding document in the cases where it's stricter. And maybe this is a question for a lawyer, and you can.
Yeah, we can talk to our CAO's office about that.
So yeah, could I make that request? We have our own real estate attorney, but having multiple opinions would be a good idea. So if we could get an official statement of whether the CCNRs trump the objective guidelines if you have historic status, or vice versa.
Okay. Thank you.
And that's it.
Great. Chris Mays?
Hi, yeah, I have a couple questions. Maybe the first question is just, could you, and you explained this a little bit, but can you just explain the process kind of going forward from here? I'm sort of interested in, so you said, I think that there's a general review until November. And then I guess the second question is sort of related to that process. Like, we're talking about a neighborhood here, the Fairyland Additions, which is a fairly small, I don't know how many, 300 maybe houses, maybe less. Is there a notion that it would have to be ratified, or is it just like, because we've decided to have historic status, whatever happens, after this comment period gets chosen, and these design standards then become approved?
So there'll be, I'm just going on to the next couple of slides. The next steps are, we have this community meeting. The Historic Landmarks Commission will also be reviewing the standards at their regular meeting on November 6th. And then eventually the city council will need to adopt the standards in order to be used. So those are all opportunities for comment, but what will happen is the comments will all be gathered by city staff. And then we'll have to, and this is internal comments, this is community public comments and the Historic Landmarks Commission. And then we're going to have to work with the consultant to finalize the document, and we're going to have to make some decisions. And then, there'll be public comment at the city council meeting as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's very helpful.
Okay. Let's see. All right. So Kevin and Sandy.
Hi.
Hi there.
So I just wanted to go back to the proposal regarding second stories being allowed. This is just my personal opinion, but I do want to express it as well. My concern with that is privacy. So, all of our backyards, everyone has floor to ceiling windows in the back. And if we had people had second stories, we would have to install,
Some sort of
blinds
screen
or whatever. Yeah. And that defeats the purpose of having an Eichler, in my opinion. So I wouldn't prefer to have, I know, I do understand that people need flexibility and blah, blah, blah. But our architect, the type of architecture for our house is very, it's non-conventional. So I'm not sure if I would feel comfortable having a neighbor do a second story, because I do like leaving the blinds open in my own backyard and having that privacy, but being able to also open, have the back open and not having it covered. So I just wanted to put my opinion on second stories there, but yeah.
Have you had a chance to review that section?
We have not, but we will be reviewing it more carefully soon.
Great. I would just, and it's not set in stone by any means, but I would suggest looking at it for sure and seeing how they think a second story can be achieved and whether, you think that's compatible. Because by concept, it may be more like, oh my gosh, that would be, really out of character. But, if you take a look at the examples and what the actual standards are and see whether you still think the same thing. You may or may not, but I would definitely take a look at the text and the photos.
Okay, we'll be doing that for sure.
Wait, okay, thank you.
Okay, Nabila.
Yeah, hi. My wife and I would just want to echo the same concerns about privacy with the second story. We also need to review the full text of the document, but like for example, our neighbor is maybe 5 feet away from our fence line, and if they put any sort of second story up, I don't see how they wouldn't be able to see right into our our entire back line of our house. So we just wanted to add our 2 cents to that.
Great. I've got you down.
Thank you.
All right, Jay?
Hi, yeah, I also wanted to congratulate staff on and the architect on this plan. I think it's excellent in many, many ways. But I also wanted to, I know we've said, I'm probably the third person that said this, think more about second story additions, particularly with the recommendation that these additions be pushed toward the back of the property. That's exactly what would be the problem that I think other people are talking about. All of the backs of our buildings are just solid walls of glass. And as you have a second floor neighbor, they'd be just looking right in on you. It's something unique to Eichler's, but that combined with the fact that you're recommending pushing these second floor additions when allowed to the back of property. The other comment I had was I did just skim through the design standards, and it was I was concerned over the requirement that any solar panels have a very minimal exposure from the street. I understand we want to minimize that, but at the same time, panels may require certain orientations in order to maximize their efficiency. And I think that given the fact that we want to be a historic neighborhood, but we also want to be try to be as green a neighborhood as we can and to be energy independent. I think that needs to be looked at. I think that the priority should be toward the solar panel and not its visibility. And then the third item I wanted to ask about was, I don't remember seeing in the report any discussion of electrical light fixtures in terms of design standards. Do you know if that's included in this or not? Or did I just miss it?
I don't remember, so I think we'll have to go back and look, but I am making a note of it.
But they are very prominent design elements that it would be important, much like front doors, that it's important that they have a modern look rather
Okay.
than something more traditional in appearance. And that's all I had to say.
Great. I just wanted to point out that the solar panel section, which is part of the ADUs, I think, an accessory structure section, is it's guidelines rather than objective design standards. So it's just giving advice on sort of,
Oh, okay.
the desire to have a minimal profile, but it's not required.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Perfect. Peter?
Hi, my name is Peter Hurd, and I would like to introduce myself. I am the co-chair with Sally Zarnowitz in creating this design criteria that we began working on 6 years ago, and getting the neighborhood together to determine once and for all that we had some sort of documentation that protected basically, quote, the architectural integrity of the Eichler design in an Eichler neighborhood. It's obvious to most of us that when you enter an Eichler neighborhood, it looks like an Eichler neighborhood, and it's defined by many of those attributes that we're talking about. So that was our premise, and we had a committee of various people in the neighborhood who went out of their way and did an incredible job over 4 years or more to help us through many, many weeks and months of planning, knocking on doors, and going through all of these things to try and get it as right as we can, and respect the homeowners as well, of course, who lived in the homes and their investments. So to that degree, that's how we got where we are. I wanted to mention something that we talked about greatly, which is the second story additions. By and large, we were not for them at all. They are not an original Eichler concept. more or less. And we did not prefer to see them for many of the reasons that you all are addressing. However, in an effort to be accommodating and not scare away potential owners or buyers from doing what they wanted to do with their investment up to a point, we recommended a design review that would minimize what a second story could be like and how big it could be. And that either had to do with like the positioning of the second story, and most importantly, the roof line and how much of it there was. So that's why we left it a little ambiguous, because we didn't want to turn people off and say, we don't like what's going on. Whereas the majority of all of us, and most of the people I'm hearing tonight, don't want a second story on an Eichler because it was not indicative of what an Eichler was. So there was consideration for it, but we did compromise by saying, let's help the design review people can put conditions on it that make it more acceptable and less intrusive in the architectural community as we see in Eichler. So that's how that got there.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Very helpful. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Did you have anything else to add, Peter, or?
Well, just that I think that the city's done a wonderful job in putting this together. We spent a lot of time in Sacramento, and Sally has done an incredible job with her talents of putting together these documentations. I was involved in the organization of the process, and she was the guru of the architectural specialties. And we all worked together. Bill Fanall, Jerry, very many of us were involved in the neighborhood putting these things together and had many meetings. So there was a lot of thought put into it. And so we're very happy to be at this place today with the city and the fact that they have put this together, and that we're here discussing this and making it something that we can live with and compromise with as we need to. But again, I want to say the main ingredient of this whole thing is to absolutely protect the architectural integrity of what an Eichler neighborhood looks like, period. From the outside, we don't care what people do inside. That's where they live. It's their home. I like the suggestion, if it meets code, to extend out the back of the house instead of going up, things like that. And I'm very sensitive, and I think we all are, especially, that was mentioned often, to people having second stories that could look in people's backyards with all the glass backyards. I think that's a very valid point. It robs all the other people of their privacy and their investment. So I think it's a very sensitive subject. And that's why we didn't really like it. But we hope that you all can find a way to mitigate any problems that may chance to want to develop through some approval of some variation of it.
So Daniel, meet Peter and Sally. I don't know if you know them, but they were very prominent in the efforts for both the guidelines and the National Register nomination. So they're great contacts.
Yes, I've definitely met Sally, and she was a great help in bootstrapping our work to get on the historic preservation list.
Great. Emma?
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I know we're like beating a dead horse here with the second stories. I just wanted to propose a potential alternate solution, and I'm not sure how this works with the existing permit process or the city, but I just can't help but wondering about neighbor approval for some of those kind of projects. Like, I completely understand the wanting to be flexible. I also found it kind of like, I don't know if I would use the word hypocritical, but for lack of a better word, like the garage can't be turned into living space, yet you can add a second story. Like some of these things, it's like, okay, you can expand, but only in these ways. And that seems a little bit restrictive to me. So I wonder about, as part of the permit process, can the 4 neighbors surrounding you, have weigh in on that at all? That was one thought. Maybe that is not possible, not realistic, but it was a thought there, because I think, to me, I think that there are second stories in our neighborhood that already exist that have been tastefully done. Like, it's not a problem. Like, I actually find a lot of these guidelines too restrictive for homeowners. I think the concern comes, for some people, maybe it comes from the historical integrity. For a lot of people, they're just like, I don't want someone looking at me naked walking through my house, because that's what we all do. We don't have front windows. We only have back windows. Covering up those windows is like a major problem. It's like, we all have had the experience of waking up and having your gardener see you naked, because that's what it means to live in an Eichler house. We don't also want our neighbors seeing that, right? I think that's where people are coming from with that. I know this has been talked about a lot, but I think if we are thoughtful about how that's implemented in terms of, can these neighbors be asked as part of the permit process, or can there be very specific guidelines of viewpoints? Like, I know in architecture, you can say like, well, it can be this high up and you can have a view at this angle. Those kinds of things I would want to see much more clearly, because I think that addresses the privacy issue much more than here, where it's like sort of ambiguous. Maybe you can do it, it's discouraged. Yeah, so that was one thought there. And in general, I found like the landscaping stuff, similar to Kathy, also to be very restrictive and also hard to implement or sort of like keep track of. And I agreed with her also that not just that, but I worry about people just doing things unpermitted because they're so worried by being struck by all of these standards. Same with like the solar panels, like green energy is so important, and people are like, well, I don't even want to put solar panels in because the city's going to nick me for, all of that. Not to mention it takes a long time to get these permits approved and everything. So I did want to echo that I have that same concern with some of this. I think generally having historical guideline standards is wonderful. And of course, this is why we're having this meeting, want to be very deliberate about how they are implemented to make sure that people feel encouraged to comply and not deterred from it. That's all.
Thanks, Emma. I just wanted to see what others thought about, she mentioned the second story versus not being able to enclose garages for living space. And I just wanted to see if others had any thoughts about that, or some things being too restrictive or some not enough. Does anyone have any thoughts?
There is a difference between permitting and guidelines.
I shouldn't say
No. After.
All right, Sally?
Hi, thank you, Dana, for all the work on this. Thanks to the city and to Page and Turnbull. Just kind of recognizing that it is the city's document and the city will be, using it. I think one of the main things on the second story would be a question about the zoning, because the zoning allows 2 stories. So would it actually be, could the design guidelines actually prohibit that? So I assume that's something that would be looked into, because, that's kind of our general understanding is the zoning, has setbacks and height and a number of stories. And unless we had, without like a single story overlay or a planned development zoning that restricted that, could that be enforced with the guidelines? I guess that's a question that maybe is opening tonight. I'm not sure. I think also the living space is allowed with an ADU or a JADU, right? So, and I think the document's pretty clear about that you can convert the garage to a junior ADU by state law, basically, right? I felt like it covered some of that. Also, some of the skylight, the solar panels, it was clear that, those are allowed, but these are, like you said, Dana, I think you said that they're, not standards, but guidelines. So anyhow, I don't know if that, just some of my thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah, just to clarify too, like Sally was saying, gosh, I can't even remember when it was, but it's the solar stuff is state law too. So we can't prohibit solar on houses. Okay, we have actually people in the audience here in the room, so I'm going to go to their comments. Just 1 minute.
Well, hello, my name is Daniel, and I'm a designer. I'm a home designer in the San Jose area in the Silicon Valley, and I'm coming as a service provider to some of the homeowners and some of the people that are working with these homes and construction. And my question, I guess, is just understand a little bit about what the benefits are when a neighborhood becomes part of the registry, just to see, why it's encouraged and why not. And then a little bit about the technical questions is like, how well are you guys contemplating the integration with all the new and high energy or energy efficiency requirements and equipment that is now available for people? These are very difficult houses to work with. There's not enough space to run lines and ducts and systems. So what is the city doing to accommodate for these upgrades that are now are happening, and how to not discourage people from getting permits? And then also a little bit about well, just touching on like the sustainability. I know I had a case, working on a historical home where it was just really difficult to understand what the guidelines, or what the requirements are, and how energy efficiency products really fit the criteria of some of these historical homes that do very poorly due to just very, not being designed to perform like homes are designed to perform now. Just kind of like, what are you guys doing to integrate also with building, with the other departments, with environmental, to really make a design guideline that not only encourages the preservation, but it also helps people move forward into like the future of modern houses and performing houses. All right.
Thank you. I wondered, you had the question about how it's difficult to accommodate energy efficiency. I was wondering if you were speaking specifically to the Eichlers or historic homes in general.
Yeah, historic homes in general.
Okay, so not just specific to Eichlers, because I just wondered if there's anything
Eichler
that
is
you
super
could.
hard, like with like windows and very poor insulation, and people don't want to do upgrades because they don't want to change the siding, because they don't want to get into like a planning review. So it's really difficult, right, to upgrade these homes without really crossing that threshold where people are being required to do extensive requirements already by building, and then now also by planning. So that's gonna make it twice as difficult to get a permit, twice as expensive to get a permit, which is, homeowners know that, but
And just to clarify, so this one of the neighborhoods, is already, it's already designated, it's already subject to requirements. So the intent for this is to, and I don't know if you've used the year-old house guidelines, you have, so is to make it clearer and, their standards. So it's very specific, whereas, the guidelines can be a little bit more, subject to interpretation. So these should be hopefully going in that direction, that is giving you more specific guidance rather than the other guidelines. But I'm happy to have a conversation with you, maybe offline. I can exchange some information with you and we can talk about that. But general, as I said in the beginning, these standards are meant to follow the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, which are federal standards and guidelines that pretty much most communities in the country use. And sort of, if you look at them in terms of tiers, it's, to maintain, kind of preserve the character defining features, then repair them, and then replace kind of only when necessary. I know windows is a really difficult topic, but there are lots of ways that windows can be made energy efficient without replacing them.
And siding, you know, these are, you know, it's very hard to find the material, to find materials of quality,
Yeah.
very few choices for owners. And then what, so is that a benefit of being a part of the registry, that you get very clear guidelines and requirements? Or in general, what is the benefit of the neighborhood turning? Because you said there was even other communities that might want to do this. Like, why would a community would want to be part of the
Oh,
registry?
we're not really talking about designation here. I mean, there's various benefits of taking advantage of the state historical building code, or if you were an individual landmark, you could apply for a Mills Act contract. But a lot of it has to do with predictability of changes in your neighborhood, you know, in that neighborhood, whatever neighborhood you're talking about, because it's about accommodating changes. So we know that that's going to happen, but guiding it in a way that's sensitive to, you know, the character of that neighborhood, so that you have some compatibility, even though you have new construction or additions and that type of thing. That's the benefit. And, you know, historic districts tend to maintain their value. They're have more stability in terms of their value, because when you're buying in, you know that these guidelines are going to apply, and you kind of know what to expect in the future. That you're not going to have a lot of tear downs and new construction and designs that may not be compatible with the character of the area. Okay, Kathy, I'm kind of going back around. Did you have any more questions?
I have to say I share everybody's concern about the second stories. Not only can they see into the entire back of our homes, but many of us have atriums in the middle of our houses, which are open to the sky, and which can, if somebody had a second story behind us, they would actually be able to see into the atrium and into rooms at the front of my house, for example. So it would really be a nightmare. So that's on the second story. I'm wondering, I guess one question that I've run into myself relates to the windows in the small bedrooms on the side of the house. I looked into retrofitting with, or you know, taking out and replacing those windows with new windows that would be more energy efficient, and decided not to because of the egress requirements of the city code. I'm assuming that these guidelines don't supersede anything in the safety standards of the city. Is that your understanding as well, Dana?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so we just leave it the way it is because, you know, it's too much of a change. And then these houses have very small bedrooms. Storage space is kind of at a premium, and I've thought many times and wondered where I could add closets. One place that occurs to me, and I'm wondering if there's any possibility of flexibility in these guidelines, not guidelines, but standards, to allow moving the front wall out a couple of feet toward the sidewalk, you know, in that direction, to enable adding a closet. Closet would not require a window, so it wouldn't need to change the appearance of the house on the outside. If that front wall looked exactly the way it used to look, except it would be 1.5 to 2 feet closer to the sidewalk, and as long as the setback requirements were still met. But the way I read these standards currently, I don't see that would be allowed.
I think that's correct. I think the standard forbids it.
Yeah.
My only thought in just looking at some of the photos on the front front of the document are, the buildings, and maybe Sally, she's an architect, can opine, but they're very much a flush plane in the front. So that would be changing that horizontality in the front. That's just my only initial thought.
Mhm. So maybe pull the garage out by the same distance to make it match, that type of thing. So it ended up looking exactly the same from the front. It would only be from the side that it would look different. Anyhow, I'll put together an email with some of these comments for you.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. Daniel?
Thank you. Actually, I have two comments. One, with regard to Kathy's comment, I think as the standards drafted, it would not be okay. And one of the reasons it would not be okay is because your facade would now not be in the plane of all the other houses, and Eichlers tend to line up. So it's not even a question of looking at your individual house. It's the net effect on the neighborhood, because the positioning of the houses is part of the plan, how they sit next to each other. And well, the other thing I wanted to go on record for is on this garage's ADU, I would recommend section 9.1.17 just be removed, or explicitly say you can't do this. And the logic in that section of the document doesn't really follow, because if you're going to make it an ADU, it needs to have an independent entrance, and it's going to need to have some windows. And the only way to really do that is to punch a hole in the garage door, which breaks the facade. So it may appear to be flexible in the standard, but it's really not a feasible option to create a junior ADU out of the garage and have autonomous entry without destroying the facade.
Side entrance, maybe?
Noted.
Yeah, but you have to have air. You have to have airflow, right? And it's going to need windows and doors, and it doesn't seem very viable to do it without wrecking the front of the house.
Except that ADUs, we don't have any design review over ADUs, so there's not much we can do anyways. I think that this is just trying to provide some guidance for people to look at in designing, but we wouldn't actually review them in planning. But I'll make sure. I don't know. We have our own, the city has its own ADU ordinance.
But is there a difference in what you would review? If the ADU is a new structure that you build in your backyard, that requires a permit.
Just a building permit.
A building permit. But if you were to create an ADU out of a garage, you need to run electricity and water. And that does require a permit.
Right, but it's all building permit though. It's not a planning permit.
So then that's a distinction I was not aware of. So then these objective standards only being looked at when it's a planning permit and not a building permit?
So when you make some changes that trigger a building permit, a single family house permit would be required. But for ADUs, because there's state law that regulates ADUs, we are not allowed to do a discretionary review over ADUs. Same thing with these objective design standards. We're not allowed to review it. So we don't have planning doesn't look at the design of ADUs except for, and what I was going to say is we'll have the consultant check and make sure that this guideline section is at least in conformance with the city's ADU ordinance, because we do have general setbacks and other things that are objective design standards that apply already. But I think in this document, they're just trying to say, on these lots, maybe could be compatible if you did it this way, but it's not required.
Okay, got it.
Is that clear as mud, or you look like you're?
It's the distinction that I was not aware of, so I need to kind of process it, but it sort of makes the point moot, whether it's in the objective design standard or not.
Right. It's just the chapter 9, it says design guidelines. So they're just guidelines. They're not standards. That's
Got
the
it.
reason why that's the only section like this. So it's solar panels, which we also don't have control over because of state law.
Yeah.
Things like that. ADUs, that's all state law regulated. All right. Hold on 1 minute. I'm going to get the microphone from the audience.
From what I've read, it's excellent. And thank you for the time that was spent on this. And thank you for the contributions that we've gotten from the community. With any sort of regulation, the question in my mind comes up to enforcement. If there is an objective standard and somebody, whether it's planting in the front yard, putting a fence up, putting something maybe that's less obtrusive, but inconsistent with the standards. The city isn't policing this, right? So is there a method for the community to flag something if they feel like it's out of, and what is that, right? That's one question. And then the other one, which is far afield from that, is there anything in this that aids or impedes Mills Act contracts, from happening?
So your first question is kind of about code enforcement. We can really only review things that require a building permit, and that would affect. There's not a lot that we can do with that if no permit is required. It is hard to check. So for instance, if you're replacing a window, but you're not changing the opening, a building permit is not required, but it might be, it would be under a single family house permit, but that's a difficult one. That happens a lot. And it's hard to enforce. So generally code enforcement doesn't have the staff to be going out. I think we now have a targeted approach where there's certain areas that code enforcement is going. But they have a website where you can report any potential violations on your own. You can do that. In terms of the Mills Act.
So if somebody did report let's say somebody's really tweaked about, privacy because of something that they perceive to be outside the standard. So they would report that, and then what happens?
Well, the chances are that it would be reported, and that it's not that it wouldn't comply with the standards. It would be that they didn't get the required building permit.
So they'd have to get a permit.
Yeah.
And then if it was inconsistent with the standards, would they be required to take it down if they?
Well, and that's difficult too, because, let's say they apply for a single family house permit. And we've had this in other, in a conservation area. And we issue a permit for, the changes. They have 4 years to complete that work under that permit, but we can't make somebody do the work. So it's a little bit of a catch-22. So the work may have been done in violation, and we've issued a permit to correct it, but we can't make them correct it. So that's the difficulty there. In terms of the Mills Act, I would say that it's unlikely that that could be taken advantage of with the Eichler neighborhoods. And I don't know if Sally wants to opine, but I would imagine that these are more so maybe than in other neighborhoods about the collection than about the individual buildings. it might be difficult to have one rise above to that individual significance unless maybe somebody lived there or something like that. So I'm not sure that that would be as applicable to these neighborhoods as maybe some others.
So having standards basically doesn't have an impact for the positive or the negative. Probably.
I didn't understand the question.
So having these objective standards in no way directly benefits or, you know.
Well, it benefits in that Eichlers and modern houses are not addressed in the year-old house guidelines at all. So it, it's providing design advice and guidance and, requirements where that's kind of non-existent at the moment. So hopefully the idea is that it's making it clearer for people what the character defining features are that are not included in the year-old house guidelines because it's exclusively, pre-World War II houses. Okay, I think we will finish the presentation. Let's see. So, as I said, the comments, the Historic Landmarks Commission will be reviewing the document on November 6th. And just for people to be aware, the city has restricted public meetings, not community meetings, but public meetings where you have to make comment in person. So if anyone wanted to comment at the Historic Landmarks Commission meeting, you would need to attend in person, or you could email comments to our support staff. And there's direction on that on our Historic Landmarks Commissions and agendas webpage.
Anna, you're not sharing any slides if you thought you were.
Oh, I'm not?
No.
Okay. Yeah?
I can see them.
Okay.
Yes, she's been sharing the slides. Yes.
So you can email support staff for the Landmarks Commission, or you can come in person. It'll be in the wing rooms at City Hall. You can also email me comments anytime. Just put in the heading Eichler Design Standards, and my email is on the slides. You can also submit comments at any time through November 8th. The website, the QR code for the website is on the slide. We showed this slide previously, but tonight's the community meeting, Historic Landmarks Commission meeting coming up November 6th, and we haven't determined yet the council meeting date. December meetings tend to get very, very full. They don't meet in January, so I have a feeling it probably will be February, but the information will be posted on the project website. So any final questions? Peter, did you have a question, or is your hand just left up?
I didn't have a question. I just think it's wonderful everybody was able to voice their opinions and their feelings about this. I think it's a wonderful thing that we're able to create this as a mid-century sort of design project compared to this old house, because they are different. And I think it's great that we were able to differentiate this and get this going. And I thank everybody that's been involved, and everybody that continues to be, and yourself as well, Dana, and your entire your entire group.
Well, thank you. And thanks, Sally, for all the work that you've put into it. And thank you all for coming. I just wanted to let you know that this Zoom meeting will be posted on the project website, as well as any future meetings with the city council. So be sure to continue to check in on the project website. And if you have any questions, you can email me anytime. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate your participation and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.